Imagine you are standing on the deck of a ship in the middle of a violent storm. The waves are towering, the wind is screaming, and most of the crew is panicking, running in circles, or clinging to outdated maps. But in the corner, there is one man sitting perfectly still. He isn't ignoring the storm. He's studying the barometer, calculating the wind resistance, and calmly waiting for the precise moment to steer. He doesn't move often, but when he does, it changes everything. That man is Charlie Munger. For decades, the world has looked at Berkshire Hathaway and seen the smiling, grandfatherly face of Warren Buffett. But if Buffett is the face of the greatest investment engine in history, Charlie Munger was its specialized high-performance cooling system and its most rigorous structural engineer. In her definitive biography, Damn Right, Janet Lowe pulls back the curtain on a man who didn't just want to be rich, he wanted to be rational. This book is not a dry collection of financial statements or stock tips. It is a psychological profile of a polymath in a suit. It's the story of a man who survived devastating personal tragedy, professional shifts, and nearly a century of economic upheaval by building what he called a latticework of mental models. He didn't just study business. He studied physics, biology, history, and psychology to find the big ideas that govern how the world actually works. As we journey through this story, we're going to explore 3 or 4 core themes that defined Munger's 99 years on this planet. The power of inversion, the idea that to solve a complex problem, you must first turn it backward. The Lollapalooza effect, how multiple psychological biases can act together to drive humans toward incredible success or total ruin. Extreme patience versus extreme aggression. Why waiting for years for the right opportunity and then betting the farm is the only way to win big? Elementary worldly wisdom. Why being a specialist is a dangerous form of man-with-a-hammer syndrome. Charlie Munger's life is a masterclass in how to think for yourself in a world that is desperate to tell you what to believe. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a student, or just someone trying to navigate the chaos of the modern era, Munger's damn right attitude offers a grounded, slightly grumpier, but infinitely more effective way to live. Let's begin at the beginning, in the frost-bitten plains of the American Midwest, to see what kind of soil produces a mind like this. Chapter 1. The Omahans. Why is it that certain patches of Earth seem to grow a specific kind of human? If you look at the map of the United States, Omaha, Nebraska, sits almost exactly in the center of place defined by its distance from the glamour of the coasts and its proximity to the harsh reality of the seasons. To understand Charlie Munger, you have to understand the Omaha DNA. It is a place where the wind is sharp. The winters are long, and the culture is built on a foundation of no-nonsense survival. In the early 20th century, Omaha wasn't just a city. It was a character study in Stoicism. Janet Lowe describes this environment as the Old Omaha, a world populated by people who viewed bragging as a cardinal sin and debt as a moral failing. This is the soil Charlie was planted in. But the question we have to ask is, how does a regional mindset of playing it safe produce a man who would eventually command billions of dollars? The answer lies in the unique blend of the Munger family history. Charlie's grandfather was a federal judge, a man of immense community standing who lived through the brutal financial panics of the late 1800s. From his grandfather, Charlie didn't just learn about the law. He learned about the fragility of systems. He saw that even the most established people could be wiped out if they didn't respect the laws of economics and human nature. Imagine a young Charlie watching his elders. He isn't seeing the get-rich-quick energy of the roaring 20s. Instead, he's absorbing a worldview that says, the world is a dangerous place. The only way to navigate it is with a clear head and a deep reserve of staying power. This upbringing instilled what we might call the Midwestern filter. In our modern world, we are bombarded with hustle culture and the pressure to pivot every 6 months. Munger's Omaha roots taught him the opposite, the value of standing still. In Omaha, if you planted a crop, you didn't dig it up the next day to see if it was growing. You waited. You endured the frost. You respected the process. Lowe highlights a fascinating contradiction in the Omaha character. These were people who were deeply conservative in their lifestyle, but radical in their independence. They didn't care what they thought in New York or London. They had their own yardstick. Charlie's father, Al Munger, was a successful lawyer who epitomized this. He provided a comfortable life, but he never let Charlie forget that comfort was a byproduct of utility, not an end in itself. The philosophical depth here is profound. Munger learned early on that reputation is a form of capital. In a small city like Omaha, if you broke your word, you didn't just lose a deal. You lost your place in the ecosystem. This created a mental framework where integrity wasn't just a nice-to-have moral trait, it was a functional necessity for long-term success. Think about your own Omaha. What are the silent rules you grew up with? Are they helping you see the world clearly, or are they blinkers? For Charlie, his background acted as a suit of armor. When he eventually moved into the high-stakes, often delusional world of global finance, he never lost that judge's grandson perspective. He was always the boy from Nebraska, looking at the sophisticated bankers and thinking, this doesn't match the reality of the grocery store. There is a story Lowe recounts about the Munger family during the Depression. While others were panicking, the Mungers were focused on who they could help and how to maintain their standard of logic. They didn't move toward the chaos. They moved toward the facts. This is the origin of Munger's famous equanimity. He saw that the people who survived the Depression were those who had pre-mortemed. Their lives they had prepared for the worst, so they could behave their best when the worst arrived. Connecting this to real life today, we often feel like we are victims of our environment. But Munger's story suggests that we can choose which parts of our environment to internalize. He took the Omaha work ethic and the judicial respect for evidence, but he discarded the parochialism. He kept the roots, but grew the branches much further than anyone expected. As we move forward, keep this image in your mind. A young man with a sharp nose and even sharper eyes, sitting in a quiet house in the middle of a blizzard, reading a book about a world he hasn't seen yet, already understanding its rules better than the people living in it. He was an Omahan by birth, but a citizen of the Republic of Reason by choice. Key takeaway: your foundational values act as the operating system for your life. If you build a system based on honesty, patience, and the respect for facts, you can withstand any external storm. Now that we understand the soil, let's look at the seed itself. In the next chapter, we'll see how Charlie's childhood wasn't just about school and play, but about the development of a relentless, almost obsessive curiosity that would become his greatest weapon. Chapter 2. A Formative Childhood. If you were to walk into the Munger household in the 1930s, you probably wouldn't find Charlie playing sports or chasing the typical thrills of youth. Instead, you would likely find him buried in a book. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a primary mode of existence. Charlie Munger was often described as a book with legs, and this insatiable appetite for reading served as the foundation for what he would later call worldly wisdom. But let's look closer. Why does one child become a passive consumer of stories while another, like Charlie, becomes a relentless seeker of patterns? The childhood of Charlie Munger was an apprenticeship in observation. He was raised in a household where the dinner table was a theater of ideas. His father, Al, didn't just tell Charlie what to think, he demonstrated how to think. They discussed legal cases, local personalities, and the underlying causes of the Great Depression. In this environment, Charlie learned a vital lesson. Everything is connected. You cannot understand a legal case without understanding human psychology. You cannot understand the economy without understanding the incentives that drive a shopkeeper. The grocery store laboratory. One of the most famous anecdotes of Charlie's youth involves a small, unassuming building, Buffett's grocery store, long before he became the Oracle of Omaha. Warren Buffett's family owned a grocery store where a young Charlie Munger worked. Although the two titans wouldn't meet for another 20 years, they both passed through the same rigorous school of hard knocks. Working at the grocery store was Charlie's first encounter with the real world of commerce. It was exhausting, repetitive, and strictly disciplined. The elder Buffett Warren's grandfather was a man of uncompromising standards. If the floor needed scrubbing, it was scrubbed until it shone. If a customer was owed a penny, they got that penny. From this, Charlie didn't just learn about inventory. He learned about the physics of business. He saw that a business is a fragile ecosystem of trust, efficiency, and narrow margins. He learned that details are often the difference between a thriving enterprise and a shuttered shop. This early exposure to the ground level of the economy meant that later in life, when he was looking at multi-billion-dollar balance sheets, he was still mentally checking if the floors were scrubbed. He could smell a bad shopkeeper from a mile away. Curiosity as a survival mechanism. Janet Lowe points out that Charlie was never a star student in the conventional sense of seeking grades for the sake of approval. He was a star student of the world. He was fascinated by biology, specifically the way organisms adapt to their environments. He saw that the same rules of evolution applied to companies and individuals. Think about the man with a hammer syndrome, a concept Munger would popularize later. It's the idea that to a man with only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Charlie's childhood was a deliberate attempt to fill his toolbox with more than just a hammer. He wanted the screwdriver of biology, the wrench of history, and the pliers of psychology. He was practicing what we now call first principles thinking. While other kids were memorizing dates in history class, Charlie was asking why an empire fell. Was it an incentive problem? Was it a lack of resources? This habit of digging beneath the surface of an event to find the root cause is what would eventually allow him to see opportunities. In the stock market that others missed because they were too busy looking at the surface of the price chart, the shadow of loss. Life, however, isn't just about intellectual growth. It's about emotional tempering. Even in his youth, Charlie wasn't spared from the darker side of the human experience. The loss of his younger brother, while he was still quite young, was a sharp introduction to the concept of irreversibility. In physics, some processes can be reversed and some cannot. Death is the ultimate irreversible process. For a mind as rational as Charlie's, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a data point. It taught him about the randomness of the universe and the limits of human control. It reinforced his Omaha Stoicism. If the world can take things away from you without warning, the only thing you truly own is your own character and your ability to reason. The psychological blueprint. Psychologically, Charlie's childhood developed in him a high degree of internal locus of control. He didn't look to teachers, the government, or luck to determine his path. He believed that through intense study and objective observation, he could navigate the maze of life. This led to a certain brutal honesty that stayed with him his entire life. He had no patience for face-saving or social niceties that obscured the truth. If a theory was wrong, it was wrong. If an idea was stupid, it was stupid. This wasn't about being mean, it was about being accurate. In the world of Munger, an inaccurate thought is more dangerous than a sharp word. Reflection. Building your own lattice work. As we reflect on Charlie's formative years, we have to ask ourselves, are we specialized or are we worldly wise? Most of us are trained to be specialists. We learn one trade, one set of rules, and we stick to it. But Charlie's childhood shows us that the most valuable skill isn't knowing the answer, but knowing the fields of play. By reading widely and working at the grocery store, he was learning the grand rules of the game. He was building the first few bars of his latticework of mental models. He realized that if you only know one thing, you are at the mercy of the person who knows two. And Charlie intended to know everything. Key takeaway: knowledge is most powerful when it is diverse. By learning the fundamental principles of different disciplines, you build a mental map that allows you to navigate complex situations without getting lost. With his childhood foundation set, the winds of the world were about to pick up. The quiet libraries of Omaha were soon replaced by the chaos of a world at war. In the next chapter, we'll see how Charlie's stint in the military and his time at Harvard Law would sharpen his meteorological mind and set him on a collision course with destiny. Chapter 3. The War Years and Beyond. In 1941, the world ignited. For a young man like Charlie Munger, the entry of the United States into World War II wasn't just a historical event. It was a massive, non-negotiable disruption. He was a student at the University of Michigan at the time, but like millions of others, his personal ambitions were sidelined by the global struggle. However, where most saw a detour or a burden, Munger, the student of reality, found a specialized laboratory for his developing mind. The military has a way of stripping away the veneer of civilization and revealing the raw mechanics of systems. It forces you to deal with bureaucracy, life or death data, and the unpredictable nature of human behavior under pressure. For Charlie, the war years were a masterclass in probabilistic thinking, the meteorological mind. The Army Air Corps didn't send Charlie to the front lines with a rifle. They sent him to Caltech to become a meteorologist. This assignment was a lollapalooza of intellectual growth. Meteorology is the study of complex nonlinear systems. You are given a vast array of data: temperature, pressure, wind speed, humidity, and asked to predict an uncertain future. If you're wrong, pilots die. This was Charlie's true introduction to risk management. In weather forecasting, you quickly learn that there are no certainties, only likelihoods. You learn to look for the fronts, the places where different forces collide to create a storm. Think about how this translates to the world of finance. A market, much like the atmosphere, is a system of moving parts. Most people look at the weather, the current stock price, and assume it will stay the same. Charlie learned to look at the atmospheric pressure, the underlying economic conditions, to see the storm coming before the first drop of rain hit the ground. He realized that to be successful, you don't need to be right about everything. You just need to be less wrong about the big things than everyone else. The Harvard Law outsider. When the war ended, Charlie headed to Harvard Law School. But there was a problem. He didn't have an undergraduate degree. Most people would have seen this as an impenetrable wall. Charlie saw it as a clerical error in the universe that needed correcting. Through sheer force of logic and a bit of family influence via a dean who was a family friend, he persuaded Harvard to let him in. At Harvard, Charlie was the nonconformist, while other students were busy memorizing the what of the law. Charlie was obsessed with the why. He found the academic approach to law too narrow. It was that man with a hammer problem again. The professors taught law as if it existed in a vacuum, separate from economics or psychology. Charlie, however, saw the law as a set of incentives. He realized that the way a law is written dictates how people will behave. If you create a bad incentive, you will get bad behavior, no matter how much you preach morality. This insight that incentives are the most powerful force in the human universe became one of the cornerstones of his philosophy, the reverse engineering of success. During this period, Charlie began to refine his most famous mental tool, inversion. The story goes that during his time as a weather forecaster, he didn't ask, "How can I make the pilots safe?" Instead, he asked, "What is the easiest way to kill these pilots?" By identifying the ways to kill them: micey wings running out of fuel. Getting lost in fog, he could then work backward to ensure those specific things didn't happen. This is a profound shift in perspective. Most of us focus on how to win. Charlie focused on how to avoid losing. He realized that if you just avoid the big mistakes, the idiotic moves, sexes is often what's left over. He applied this to his studies. He didn't try to be the most brilliant lawyer. He tried to avoid being the sloppy one. He looked for the holes in an argument and patched them before anyone else could find them. The reality of the real world. As he graduated and moved into his early career, Charlie carried a specific kind of intellectual arrogance, not the kind based on ego, but the kind based on evidence. He had no respect for authority's sake. If a senior partner at a law firm made a claim that defied the laws of logic or economics, Charlie would tell them so. This brutal honesty was a double-edged sword. It made him an incredible problem solver. But a difficult employee. It was becoming clear that Charlie Munger was not built to be a cog in someone else's machine. He was built to build the machine itself. Reflection, the meteorology of your life. Take a moment to look at your own weather. We often feel like life is just a series of random events happening to us. But if we adopt the Munger perspective, we start to see the high-pressure zones of our habits and the low-pressure zones of our environments. Are you looking at the data, or are you just hoping for sunshine? Are you asking, how can I succeed? Or are you asking, what are the 3 things that will definitely make me fail, and how do I avoid them today? Charlie's journey through the war and Harvard taught him that clarity is a choice. It's not something that happens to you, something you fight for by stripping away the nonsense that the world tries to feed you. He emerged from these years not just with a law degree, but with a refined crap detector that would soon be worth billions. Key takeaway: to solve a difficult problem, you must invert. Always invert. By identifying and avoiding the paths to failure, the path to success becomes much clearer and more sustainable. The stage was now set. Charlie had the Omaha values, the grocery store work ethic, and the meteorological mind. He was a highly trained, deeply skeptical lawyer ready to take on the world. But as we'll see in the next chapter, even the sharpest mind can be trapped by the wrong game. Charlie was about to discover that being a great lawyer wasn't enough. He wanted to be a great owner. Chapter 4. The Making of a Lawyer. By the late 1940s, Charlie Munger had landed in Southern California, a place that was the polar opposite of the frostbitten plains of Omaha. Post-war California was an explosion of growth, sunshine, and opportunity. Charlie joined the prestigious law firm of Wright and Garrett, and on the surface, he was the picture of success, a Harvard-educated lawyer with a sharp mind and a growing reputation. But beneath the polished exterior of the young attorney, a profound dissatisfaction was beginning to ferment. To understand Charlie's transition from law to investing, we have to look at how he viewed the mechanics of the legal profession. Most people see law as a noble pursuit of justice. Charlie saw it as a business model. As a business model, he found it deeply flawed. The trap of the hourly rate. In the legal world, the primary unit of value is the billable hour. You sell your time for a fee. For most, this is a path to a comfortable, upper-middle-class life. For Charlie, it was a hamster wheel. He realized a fundamental truth that many professionals ignore. If you only get paid when you are working, you are never truly free. Charlie's meteorological mind began to analyze the incentives of the law firm. He noticed that the firm was incentivized to make problems more complex, not simpler, because complexity requires more billable hours. This rubbed against his core value of efficiency. He didn't want to sell his life in 6-minute increments. He wanted to build something that grew while he slept. He was looking for leverage. This is a crucial lesson for anyone in the modern workforce. We often mistake being busy for building wealth. Charlie understood that wealth is the result of owning assets that produce value independently of your labor. He was a lawyer by trade, but an owner by temperament. The specialist blindness. During his years at the firm, Charlie became a master of corporate law. He was the man you called when a deal was hairier than usual. But he noticed a recurring pattern among his peers. The great lawyers were often miserable, narrow-minded specialists. They knew everything about a single paragraph of the tax code, but nothing about how the world actually worked. This reinforced his disdain for the man with a hammer syndrome. He saw lawyers giving business advice based solely on legal precedents, ignoring the economic reality that would eventually bankrupt the client. He decided that he would be a generalist with an edge. He would use the law as a tool to understand the structure of deals. But he would look to other disciplines, psychology, engineering, and history, to decide if the deal was actually worth doing. He was practicing what he would later call the big ideas approach. He believed that if you knew the 100 most important ideas from the world's major disciplines, you would have a massive advantage over the specialist who only knew one. In the courtroom of business, Charlie wasn't just arguing the law. He was arguing the physics of the situation, the pivot to real estate. Charlie didn't just sit in his office and complain about the hourly rate. He started looking for the exit. He began moonlighting in real estate development. His first major project was a set of apartments near Caltech. This was where the Omaha grocery store lessons met Harvard law logic. Charlie noticed that most developers were inefficient. They cut corners on things that mattered and spent too much on things that didn't. Charlie did the opposite. He focused on the user experience. He built apartments with better layouts and more amenities than the competition, realizing that a higher quality product would attract higher quality tenants who would stay longer. He was discovering the power of compounding quality. If you build something right the first time, it pays dividends for decades. If you build it poorly, you spend the rest of your life fixing the leak. This real estate venture was Charlie's proof of concept. He made more money from a single apartment project than he did in several years of legal practice. The hamster wheel was finally losing its grip. The intellectual integrity of the no. One of the most defining traits Lowe highlights during Munger's legal years was his willingness to tell a client they were wrong. In the legal profession, client is usually the boss, but Charlie viewed himself as a trustee of the truth. If a client wanted to pursue a merger that Charlie felt was economically suicidal, he would tell them, often in very blunt terms. This earned him a reputation for being difficult, but it also earned him the trust of the most intelligent players in the market. They realized that Charlie wasn't just trying to bill them. He was trying to protect them. This is a vital lesson in social capital. By being willing to lose a fee to tell the truth, Charlie built a brand that was more valuable than any marketing campaign. He was a man who couldn't be bought. Reflection: are you selling your time or building a system? As we look at Charlie's time as a lawyer, we have to ask ourselves, what game are we playing? Many of us are trapped in the service mindset, where we believe that working harder is the key to success. But Charlie's life tells us that thinking harder and owning more is the real path to autonomy. Are you a man with a hammer, or are you building a latticework? Are you focused on the billable hour of your day, or are you looking for the leveraged opportunity that can change your trajectory? Charlie's legal career wasn't a waste of time. It was a high-level reconnaissance mission. He learned how the powerful interacted, how the tax code functioned, and how human greed often clouded judgment. He was gathering the parts for a machine he hadn't quite designed yet. But as we'll see in the next chapter, the universe was about to test his Omaha stoicism in the most brutal way imaginable. Before he could become a billionaire, he had to prove he could survive being a human. Key takeaway: professional expertise is a dangerous trap if it prevents you from seeing the broader economic and psychological landscape. True freedom comes from transitioning from selling your time to owning the system. Chapter 5: Tragedy and Resilience. It is easy to look at a man who lived to be 99 with billions of dollars and assume his path was a golden escalator of constant ascent. But the mid-1950s for Charlie Munger were not about wealth. They were about survival. In a span of just a few years, the structure of his life was systematically dismantled. He faced a lollapalooza of misfortune that would have broken a lesser spirit. This chapter is the most critical part of the Munger story because it proves that his philosophy wasn't just a way to make money, it was a way to endure the unendurable. The collapse of the first pillar. The first blow was the slow, painful dissolution of his marriage. In an era where divorce was socially stigmatized and legally complex, Charlie and his first wife, Nancy Huggins, realized they were fundamentally incompatible. The separation was not just an emotional drain, it was a financial one. Charlie moved into a meager room at the university club, a far cry from the burgeoning success he had cultivated in his legal practice. For a man who valued building systems, seeing his primary social system fail was a humbling experience. He was in his early 30s, essentially starting over with nothing but his brain and his work ethic. But as Janet Lowe points out, Charlie didn't indulge in self-pity. He applied his inversion principle to his own life. If I am in a hole, the first thing I must do is stop digging. He focused on his work, his children, and his sanity. The ultimate test, Teddy. However, the divorce was merely a shadow compared to what came next. In 1953, his 9-year-old son, Teddy, was diagnosed with leukemia. In the 1950s, this was a death sentence. There were no effective treatments, no bone marrow transplants, and very little palliative care. For a year, Charlie lived a double life. By day, he was a sharp corporate lawyer, dealing with the dry mechanics of contracts. By night, he was a father watching his son waste away. He would visit the hospital, sit by Teddy's bed, and then walk the streets of Pasadena, crying. The death of a child is the ultimate irreversible event. For a mind like Charlie's, one that believed every problem had a logical solution, the helplessness of Teddy's condition was a brutal education in the limits of human agency. When Teddy passed away in 1955, Charlie was 31 years old, divorced, broke, and grieving a son. The Stoics' response: how does one respond to such a concentrated dose of tragedy? They would turn to escapism, bitterness, or a lifelong victim mentality. Charlie did the opposite. He leaned into Stoicism. Stoicism isn't about being cold or unfeeling. It is about understanding the distinction between what you can control and what you cannot. Charlie couldn't control the leukemia, couldn't control the failure of his first marriage, but he could control his judgment of those events. He adopted the view that terrible things will happen, and your job is to behave well anyway. This period forged the Munger steel. It stripped away any lingering vanity or desire for social approval. When you have walked the halls of a pediatric cancer ward, the opinions of a bank president or the volatility of the stock market seem trivial. He developed what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. He realized that if he could survive this, he could survive anything. The eye and the knife, misfortune, as it often does, decided to strike one more time. Years later, a botched cataract surgery left Charlie blind in one eye and in constant pain. Facing the prospect of total blindness, most people would have retreated from the world. Charlie's response? He asked his doctor if there was a way to learn Braille. He didn't complain about the surgeon's mistake. He didn't sue for emotional distress. He simply looked at the new reality, the new weather, and asked, "What is the most rational way to move forward from here?" He eventually had the eye removed, opting for a glass eye to end the pain. He treated his own body like a business asset. If a part is no longer functioning and is costing too much to maintain, you divest. The philosophy of the hard road. Janet Lowe highlights a specific Mungerism that was born in these fires. Self-pity is always a mistake. Charlie believed that self-pity was a form of psychological rot. He argued that every minute you spend feeling sorry for yourself is a minute you aren't using to fix the problem or help someone else. This is a radical departure from our modern culture of validating every feeling. Charlie validated the facts. The fact was that he was in pain. The fact was that he had lost a son. But he also believed it was a fact that he still had a responsibility to his remaining children and to his own potential. Reflection. Your personal resilience. We all face Teddy moments in our lifetimes when the world seems to conspire to break our spirit. During these times, we usually look for a why. We want the universe to explain itself. Charlie's life suggests that the why doesn't matter as much as the how. How will you carry yourself? Will you be a victim of circumstances or a navigator of reality? By the end of the 1950s, Charlie Munger was a man who had been hollowed out and rebuilt. He was tougher, more focused, and deeply aware of the preciousness of time. He was no longer just an Omahan lawyer. He was a philosopher who happened to practice law. He was ready for a second chance at life, and as we will see in the next chapter, that second chance would come in the form of a new family and a chance encounter that would change the world of finance forever. Key takeaway: resilience is not the absence of grief, but the refusal to let grief turn into self-pity. By focusing strictly on what you can control, you can rebuild a life even from the most devastating ruins. Chapter 6. A Second Marriage and New Beginnings. If Chapter 5 was the story of Charlie Munger's Great Winter, then Chapter 6 is the story of his Great Reconstruction. One of the most underrated aspects of successful people is their ability to recognize when they have been given a second chance and their discipline not to squander it. For Charlie, the late 1950s weren't just about financial recovery. They were about a deliberate, structural redesign of his personal life. The architecture of a partnership, Nancy Berry, in 1956. Charlie was introduced to Nancy Berry, like Charlie. She was a person of substance, intelligent, grounded, and possessed of a strong moral compass. They married quickly, and this union became the bedrock upon which the rest of Charlie's life was built. But why does a biography focus so much on a marriage? In Munger's world, partner selection is the ultimate high-stakes decision. Whether in business or in life, who you tether yourself to determines your trajectory. Charlie often remarked that the best way to get a good spouse is to deserve one. He didn't look for someone to fix him. He looked for someone whose values acted as a force multiplier for his own. The Munger household soon grew into a lively, chaotic, and intellectually rigorous environment. Between Charlie's children from his first marriage and the children he had with Nancy, they eventually had a tribe of 8. This large family served as a living laboratory for Charlie's ideas on education, psychology, and incentives. He wasn't a hands-off father. He was a chief rationality officer. He wanted his children to understand the world as it was, not as they wished it to be. The shift to autonomy, with a stable home life and a growing family to support, Charlie's focus shifted toward a singular goal: total independence. He had seen how the billable hour and the whims of clients could make a man a slave to the opinions of others. He wanted a few money, not for the sake of luxury, but for the sake of intellectual freedom. He began to pull away from the day-to-day practice of law. He realized that the law was a defensive game, protecting assets and navigating regulations. Investing, however, was an offensive game. It was about identifying truth before the rest of the world caught on. During this period, Charlie started his own investment partnership. He was no longer just advising. He was skin in the game, a concept later popularized by Nassim Taleb, but but lived by Munger decades earlier. He understood that your brain functions differently when your own capital is on the line. When you are a lawyer, your mistakes cost the client money. When you are an investor, your mistakes cost you your freedom. The geometry of the tribe. Janet Lowe highlights how Charlie's family life influenced his business philosophy. In a large family, you cannot manage every detail. You have to create a culture of trust and competence. You set the big rules and let the individuals operate within them. This is the exact model he would later apply to Berkshire Hathaway. He didn't want a massive corporate headquarters with thousands of employees. He wanted a seamless web of deserved trust. He realized that if you pick the right people and give them the right incentives, you don't need a thick book of regulations. You just need a shared set of values. The anti-consumerism philosophy. While his income was beginning to skyrocket, Charlie's lifestyle remained remarkably modest. This was Omaha frugality meeting California opportunity. He saw that many of his peers in Los Angeles were falling into the hedonic treadmill, buying bigger houses and flashier cars as soon as they made a profit. Charlie saw this as a massive tactical error. If you increase your expenses as fast as your income, you are still a prisoner. You just have a nicer cell. By keeping his burn rate low, he allowed his capital to compound. He understood the math. $1 saved and invested at 30 is worth $100 at 70. Every luxury purchase was a theft from his future independence. The psychology of the second act. There is a profound psychological lesson in this chapter about resilience. Many people, after the tragedies Charlie faced, would have been risk-averse for the rest of their lives. They would have clung to the safety of a law firm's salary. Charlie did the opposite. He became more aggressive in his pursuit of excellence. He didn't view his past tragedies as a reason to hide. He viewed them as a reason to hurry. He knew that life was fragile and that the window of opportunity could close at any moment. This created in him a sense of patient urgency. He was patient enough to wait for the right deal, but urgent enough to build the system that would allow him to seize it. Reflection. Who is in your inner circle? As we look at Charlie's new beginning, we have to audit our own lives. Who are the people you have chosen as your partners? Do they reinforce your rationality or your delusions? Are you building a tribe based on trust or a network based on convenience? Furthermore, are you building for status or for autonomy? Most of us are addicted to the social validation that comes from spending. Charlie's life teaches us that the greatest luxury isn't a Ferrari. It's the ability to wake up every morning and do exactly what you think is right, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Key takeaway. A strong personal foundation and a commitment to autonomy are the prerequisites for long-term success. By choosing the right partners and resisting the urge for social display, you create the mental and financial margin necessary for greatness. Charlie was now a man with a fortress of a family and a growing pool of capital. He was a predator of patterns waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, in 1959, the universe finally delivered the missing piece of the puzzle. It happened at a dinner party in Omaha. It was the moment the architect of rationality met the oracle of value. Chapter 7. The Meeting of the Minds. History is often shaped by quiet, localized collisions, moments where two separate trajectories intersect to create a new gravitational force. In the summer of 1959, Charlie Munger was 35 years old, back in Omaha to settle his father's estate. During a dinner arranged by mutual friends, he was seated across from a 29-year-old local investment manager named Warren Buffett. On the surface, they were different. Charlie was the assertive, slightly abrasive Californian lawyer. Warren was the affable, numbers-obsessed Midwesterner. But within minutes, the room disappeared. They began a conversation that would effectively last for the next 65 years. This wasn't just a meeting of two businessmen. It was the birth of an intellectual ecosystem. The recognition of the same language. Janet Lowe notes that both men felt an immediate shock of recognition. They both spoke the language of intrinsic value. In a world where most people viewed the stock market as a casino or a series of oscillating lines on a chart, Munger and Buffett viewed it as a gallery of businesses. They shared a common mentor in Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing. But while they shared a foundation, their meeting was the catalyst for an evolution. Buffett was a devotee of Graham's cigar, but strategy finding mediocre companies, selling for so cheap that you could get one last puff of profit out of them for free. Munger, with his background in law and real estate, was already beginning to suspect that this was a small-minded way to get rich. This meeting was the start of Charlie's greatest contribution to the Buffett legacy. He began the long, slow process of moving Warren from cheap to great. The power of the intellectual sparring partner. Why did this partnership work so well? It's because of a concept we can call cognitive redundancy and challenge. Most people surround themselves with yes men who validate their biases. Buffett and Munger did the opposite. They became each other's no. Charlie once said that he was the abominable no-man. His job was to find the flaw in Warren's logic. And Warren's job was to do the same for him. It created a feedback loop that was brutally honest. This is a vital lesson in social psychology. If you want to be a high-level thinker, you need someone who is smart enough to understand your best ideas and courageous enough to tell you when they are stupid. The telepathic connection. Lowe describes how the two would spend hours on the phone every day, often in silence or short bursts of data exchange. They developed a shorthand. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was about trust. In the high-stakes world of finance, trust is the ultimate friction reducer. Because they knew each other's internal operating system, they could make multi-million-dollar decisions in minutes. It would take a corporate board months of committee meetings and legal reviews. They were building a seamless web of deserved trust. This is a recurring Munger theme. He believed that modern society is overregulated because we don't trust each other. If you find a partner you can trust implicitly, you have a massive competitive advantage. If you can move faster, spend less on protection, and focus entirely on the physics of the deal. The shift in philosophy is from price to quality. This meeting eventually led to the Munger pivot. Charlie argued that it was better to buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. Think about the psychology behind this. It's buy a cigar, but you have to be willing to hang around failing businesses and liquidation sales. It's depressing work, and it doesn't scale. But to buy a wonderful business, you have to understand brand, consumer psychology, and competitive moats. Charlie pushed Warren to look at the soft qualities of a business. Does it have a moat that protects it from competitors? Does it have pricing power? The ability to raise prices without losing customers to the guy across the street? This shift allowed Berkshire Hathaway to move from being a small investment partnership to a global conglomerate. Without Charlie's push toward quality, Buffett might have remained a very successful but much smaller value investor. The Lollapalooza of two minds. The combination of Buffett's mathematical genius and Munger's multidisciplinary latticework created what Charlie called a Lollapalooza effect. This is when multiple forces move in the same direction to produce a result that is not just additive, but exponential. Together, they weren't just twice as good. They were a new species of investor. They could see through the Wall Street noise because they had each other as a sanity filter. When the market was panicking, they would talk and realize the panic was irrational. When the market was euphoric, they would talk and realize the prices were absurd. Reflection. Who is your force multiplier? As we reflect on the meeting of Buffett and Munger, we have to look at our own networks. Most of us treat networking as a way to get things from people. Charlie and Warren treated their partnership as a way to refine their own thinking. Do you have someone in your life who challenges your cigar butt ideas? Do you have a partner who moves you from cheap thinking to quality thinking? The lesson here is that genius is rarely a solitary pursuit. It is often the result of two right-sized gears finally finding each other and locking into place. Charlie was the architect and Warren was the builder, together. They were about to construct a financial fortress that would change the rules of the game. Key takeaway: a great partnership is built on shared values and complementary skills. By finding a partner who challenges your biases, you can move from mediocre gains to extraordinary compounding. The conversation that started in 1959 was about to go operational. In the next chapter, we'll see how Charlie moved from being a lawyer with a side hustle to a full-time investor, starting the engine that would eventually become the legendary Munger partnership. Chapter 8. Wheels Start Turning. By the early 1960s, Charlie Munger had reached a crossroads. He was a partner at a law firm he had co-founded, Munger, Tolles, Hills, and Wood. But his heart was no longer in the billable hour. Following his transformative meeting with Warren Buffett, Charlie realized that his true calling was not just to interpret the law, but but to master the laws of capital. In 1962, he finally stepped off the treadmill and formed Warren Munger, his own investment partnership. This was the moment the architect of rationality went fully operational. This chapter is a study in concentrated conviction. While modern financial advisors preach the gospel of diversification to protect against ignorance, Charlie took the opposite view. If you truly understand something, you should bet big. The philosophy of concentration. Janet Lowe highlights a striking difference between Charlie's early partnership and the typical investment fund. Most funds hold dozens, if not hundreds, of stocks. Charlie often held just 3 or 4. We believe that widespread diversification was diversification, a way for people who don't know what they're doing to ensure they get mediocre results. Charlie's logic was rooted in information theory. He argued that it is impossible to have a high-conviction understanding of 50 different businesses. However, it is possible for a diligent person to find 3 or 4 opportunities where the odds are overwhelmingly in their favor. He was looking for what gamblers call the mispriced bet, a situation where the probability of success is high, but the price of entry is low. Think about the mental discipline this requires. It means being willing to sit on your hands for years, doing absolutely nothing. While the world around you is constantly trading and pivoting, Charlie called this sitter naras, vesting. He realized that the big money isn't made in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. He was like a hunter in a blind, refusing to fire at squirrels because he knew a trophy buck would eventually walk by. The real estate lever, while the partnership was his primary vehicle, Charlie's early wealth was significantly boosted by his real estate developments. We see here the application of the synergy mental model. He used his legal knowledge to structure the deals, his engineering interest to oversee the construction, and his psychological insights to market the units. He famously transformed a piece of land into the Green Valley Apartments. He didn't just build boxes for people to live in. He designed a community. He recognized that by investing more in the initial quality of the landscaping and common areas, he could charge higher rents and maintain lower turnover. This is an early example of his focus on pricing power. If you offer something that is genuinely better than the alternative, you are no longer a victim of the market price. You become a price setter. The pain of the volatility test. It's important to note that Charlie's path was not a straight line of wins. In the early 1970s, during a brutal bear market, the Munger partnership took a massive hit, dropping significantly more than the broader market. This is the hidden cost of a concentrated portfolio. When you are wrong, or when the market is irrational, you feel it deeply. Lowe describes this as a period of intense pressure. Most people, seeing their net worth cut in half, would have panicked and sold everything. But Charlie's Omaha stoicism held firm. He looked at the underlying businesses he owned and asked, has the intrinsic value of these companies changed, or has only the mood of the market changed? Because he understood the physics of the businesses, he could ignore the noise of the price. This is a vital lesson in emotional regulation. Success in investing and in life isn't just about IQ. It's about temperament. As Charlie famously said, if you can't stay calm when your stocks go down 50%, you shouldn't be in this business. He used the volatility as a filter to separate the weak hands from the strong. Hands, the skin in the game, moral code. One of the most striking things about Charlie's partnership was his fee structure. Unlike modern hedge funds that charge 2% and 20% regardless of performance, Charlie didn't take a dime unless his investors made a significant profit. He believed that it was morally wrong to get rich off of other people's losses. This created a seamless web of deserved trust with his partners. They knew that if they were losing money, Charlie was losing money too. This alignment of incentives is a recurring theme in Munger's life. He believed that most of the world's problems are caused by agency risk, people managing other people's money or lives without having to face the consequences of their mistakes. The transition to Berkshire. By the mid-70s, Charlie realized that the partnership model was becoming less efficient. He and Warren were finding more and more opportunities to work together through companies like Blue Chip Stamps and Berkshire Hathaway. He decided to wind down his partnership and fold his capital into the larger Buffett-led vehicle. This move required a massive amount of ego suppression. Charlie was a leader, a man who liked to be the chief. but he recognized that Warren was a once-in-a-century capital allocator. By becoming the second man, Charlie wasn't diminishing himself. He was amplifying his impact. He realized that being the vice chairman of a world-changing conglomerate was better than being the king of a small investment fund. Reflection: do you have the courage to concentrate? As we look at the wheels starting to turn, we have to ask ourselves, in what areas of our lives are we diversifying? We often spread our energy, our time, and our money across dozens of projects because we are afraid to be wrong. But the Munger way suggests that true excellence comes from betting big on the few things that matter. Are you waiting for the trophy buck? Or are you wasting your ammunition on squirrels? Do you have the temperament to stay calm when your concentrated bets are being questioned by the world? Charlie's years in the partnership were the proving grounds. He showed that a man with a clear mind, stoic heart, and a latticework of mental models could outperform the entire Wall Street establishment. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was a titan in the making. And in the next chapter, we'll see how he used these skills to pull off some of the most famous acquisitions in business history. Starting with a little candy company in California, key takeaway: extraordinary results come from concentrated bets based on high-conviction knowledge. By aligning your incentives with the truth and maintaining a stoic temperament, you can turn volatility into a competitive advantage. Chapter 9: The Blue Chip Era. If the previous years were about Charlie Munger finding his footing as an individual investor, the Blue Chip Era was about the maturation of his philosophy and the formalization of his alliance with Warren Buffett. This period, roughly spanning the late 1960s through the 1970s, is defined by the acquisition of blue chip stamps and, most famously, See's candies. It represents the moment Charlie moved from buying stocks to buying businesses, and in doing so, he fundamentally rewrote the Berkshire Hathaway playbook: the float and the fountain. To understand blue chip stamps, you have to understand the concept of float. In the mid-20th century, trading stamps were a massive consumer phenomenon. Retailers bought stamps from blue chip and gave them to customers who would later redeem them for toasters or blankets. Charlie and Warren noticed something brilliant. There was a massive lag between when the stamps were bought by the merchant and when the customer redeemed them. In that gap, blue chip held a mountain of cash that didn't belong to them but that they could invest. This is other people's money that you don't have to pay interest on. This was Charlie's introduction to the capital allocation fountain. He realized that if you own a business that generates float or excess cash, and you are a genius at investing that cash, you have discovered the closest thing to a perpetual motion machine in economics. Blue chip became the war chest they used to buy other better businesses. The See's Candies pivot, a mental revolution. In 1972, See's Candies came up for sale. This acquisition is the hinge of the Munger-Buffett story. At the time, Warren was still a cigar butt investor. He looked at the price tag for See's $25 million and complained that it was multiple times the book value the physical assets like kitchens and trucks. Charlie, using his latticework of psychology and brand theory, pushed back hard. He argued that See's wasn't just a collection of stoves and sugar. It was a mental territory. Charlie understood the psychology of the consumer. He saw that people in California had a deep, emotional connection to See's. They bought it for anniversaries, birthdays, and Christmas. This meant See's had pricing power. If they raised the price of a box of chocolates by 5 cents, nobody would notice, and nobody would switch to a generic brand, because you don't give your wife generic chocolates on her birthday. This was Charlie's master class in quality over price. He eventually convinced Warren to pay the premium. See's went on to produce billions of dollars in profit for Berkshire, requiring almost no new capital to run. It was the wonderful business that Charlie had been dreaming of. It proved his theory: it is better to pay a fair price for a business that has a moat, made of consumer psychology, than to pay a bargain price for a business that is a commodity. The moat and the castle. During the blue chip era, Charlie refined the economic moat metaphor. He looked at a business like a castle. In a capitalist world, knights' competitors are always trying to storm your castle to steal your profits. Most castles are easily taken because they are in commodity industries where the only way to compete is on price. But See's Candies had a moat-a-deep, wide trench filled with brand loyalty and habit. Charlie's genius was in realizing that you don't build a moat with bricks, you build it in the minds of the customers. This insight required a deep understanding of human psychology. He looked at the Pavlovian association people had with the See's brand. He realized that a brand is just a stored promise of quality. Once that promise is lodged in the brain, it is incredibly expensive and difficult for a competitor to dislodge it. The regulatory Lollapalooza, the blue chip era, wasn't all chocolates and easy cash, because blue chip, Berkshire, and Wesco, another Munger vehicle, were all interconnected. The SEC began to take a very close look at Charlie and Warren. They were accused of essentially playing games with the ownership structures to benefit themselves. This was a test of Charlie's moral and legal integrity. He didn't hide behind lawyers or corporate cant. He walked the regulators through the logic of their decisions. He proved that while the structures were unconventional, they were designed for efficiency and long-term value, not for deception. Lowe notes that this period taught Charlie the importance of standard of care. He realized that if you are going to be a giant in the world, you have to be cleaner than clean. You can't just follow the letter of the law. You have to follow the spirit so closely that even your enemies can't find a foothold. This reinforced his seamless web of deserved trust. The economics of the Daily Journal. During this same period, Charlie took over the Daily Journal, a small legal newspaper. It was a tiny acquisition compared to See's, but it was a pure Munger play. He saw that the Daily Journal had a micro-monopoly. Lawyers had to read it for legal notices. It was an essential part of the legal infrastructure. Charlie loved toll bridge businesses. If you want to get from point A to point B, you have to pay the toll. By owning the toll bridge of legal information, he created a stable, high-margin business that thrived regardless of the economy. It was another brick in his fortress of autonomy. Reflection. What is your mental territory? As we look at the blue chip era, we have to ask ourselves, are we building commodity lives or moated lives? Most people compete on the commodity level, working the same hours, using the same skills, and charging the same price as everyone else. But Charlie's life teaches us that the real wins are in the mental territory. What is the brand of you? Do you have pricing power in your career? Have you built a moat around your skills that makes you irreplaceable? Charlie's pivot at See's Candies wasn't just a business move. It was a shift in worldview. Stopped looking at the dirt and the machines and started looking at the incentives and the psychology. He realized that the intangible, the brand, the trust, the habit is often more real and more valuable than the tangible. Key takeaway. The highest returns come from businesses with economic moats built on consumer psychology and brand loyalty. By focusing on quality over price, you can escape the commodity trap and build a fountain of compounding wealth. Charlie and Warren were no longer just two guys from Omaha. They were the architects of a new kind of conglomerate. But with this success came a new challenge. How do you manage a giant without becoming a bureaucrat? In the next chapter, we'll dive into the specific filters. Charlie used to keep his mind sharp and his crap detector functioning at 100%. Chapter 10. The Munger Style of Investing. To the uninitiated, the way Charlie Munger invested looked less like high finance and more like a monk in meditation. While the trading floors of New York were frantic scenes of shouting and flashing screens, Charlie was usually found in a quiet room, sitting on his hands, reading a report. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate style of being. If the previous chapter showed us what Charlie bought, this chapter explains how he decided to buy it. Munger's style was a rejection of the modern professional approach to finance. He didn't use complex computer models. He didn't care about beta or standard deviation, and he didn't listen to the Federal Reserve's predictions. Instead, he used a series of rigorous, multidisciplinary filters. The filter of the circle of competence. The first and most brutal filter in the Munger style is the circle of competence. Most investors feel the need to have an opinion on everything gold, crypto, tech startups, oil in the Middle East. Charlie believed that the most important skill isn't knowing everything, but knowing exactly where your knowledge ends. He famously had 3 baskets on his desk. In, out, and too tough. Most opportunities went straight into the too tough basket. If he couldn't understand how a company would be making money in 10 years using simple, first-principle logic, he walked away. He wasn't embarrassed to say, "I don't know." In fact, he viewed "I don't know" as a competitive advantage. By staying within a narrow circle of what he truly understood: retailing, insurance manufacturing, he avoided the unforced errors that bankrupt most speculators. The filter of checklist manifestos. Charlie was a fan of the checklist. He realized that even the smartest humans are prone to simple brain lapses when they get excited or tired. He used mental checklists to ensure he wasn't violating the laws of physics or psychology. Before he invested, he would run the business through a Lollapalooza check. Does it have a moat? Is the management competent and honest? Or, as he preferred, is the business so good that even an idiot could run it? Is the price fair? Am I being fooled by my own biases? He wasn't looking for reasons to buy. He was looking for reasons. To kill the deal, he treated every investment like a potential poison. If it passed all the tests, only then would he consider it. This is the ultimate inversion play. Instead of trying to find the winner, he worked tirelessly to eliminate the losers until only the winner was left standing.
Ow.
The filter of multidisciplinary lattice work. This is the core of the Munger style. Charlie believed that the big ideas of the world are the only things that matter. He argued that if you only know economics, you will misjudge the world because the world isn't just an economy, it's also a biological system, a psychological drama, and a physical structure. He used biology to understand self-organizing systems and competition. He used physics to understand equilibrium and critical mass. He used psychology to understand incentive-caused bias and social proof. Think about the Coke example. Charlie once gave a famous talk about how to turn $2 million into $2 trillion by starting a soda company. He didn't talk about profit margins first. He talked about Pavlovian conditioning, associating the drink with happiness, parent conditioning, the reward of the sugar and caffeine, and social proof, seeing everyone else drink it. He looked at Coca-Cola as a psychological machine for extracting nickels from the human brain. This is worldly wisdom in action. The filter of extreme patience. The most difficult part of the Munger style to replicate is the waiting. Charlie often went years, sometimes a decade, without making a major new investment. He described this as waiting for the fat pitch. In baseball, you can be called out for not swinging. In investing, there are no called strikes. You can stand at the plate as long as you want. Charlie waited for the moment when the odds of the bet were massively in his favor. When that moment came, as it did with the 2008 financial crisis or the early days of Apple, for Berkshire he didn't nibble. He swung with everything he had. This requires a unique temperament, the combination of a hermit's patience and a lion's aggression. Most people are too impatient to wait and too timid to strike. Charlie was the opposite. He was lethargy, bordering on sloth most of the time, followed by intense, decisive action. The filter of the management assessment. While Charlie preferred businesses that were idiot-proof, he was also a master at judging human character. He didn't look for charismatic CEOs with perfect hair and big speeches. Look for fanatics. He loved the Rose Blumkins of the world, the woman who started Nebraska Furniture Mart with $500 and outcompeted everyone through sheer obsessive focus. He looked for people who were long-term greedy, people who would do the right thing today because they knew it would pay off in 20 years. He avoided promoters and gamblers. He wanted the person who treated the company's money like it was their own family's survival fund. Reflection. What are your filters? As we look at the Munger style, we have to audit our own decision-making process. Most of us make decisions based on gut feel or what we saw on social media this morning. Do you have a too tough basket, or are you trying to solve every problem that crosses your desk? Do you have a checklist to prevent you from being stupid, or are you relying on your intelligence to save you? Munger would tell you that the latter is a recipe for disaster. Charlie's style was about simplicity. He realized that if you have to use a complex formula to prove an investment is good, it probably isn't. The best deals should scream at you. They should be no-brainers. But to see a no-brainer, you first have to clear your brain of all the junk, the biases and the man with a hammer tendencies. Key takeaway. Success is more about avoiding stupidity than seeking brilliance. By developing a multidisciplinary latticework of mental models and staying within your circle of competence, you can wait for the fat pitches that define a life. Charlie's filters made him one of the richest men in the world. But they also made him something else. A detective of the human mind. In the next chapter, we will go deep into his most famous intellectual contribution, the psychology of human misjudgment, and learn why even the smartest people are biologically programmed to make terrible choices. Chapter 11. The Psychology of Human Misjudgment. If you were to ask Charlie Munger what the most important map for navigating life was, he wouldn't point you toward a financial ledger or a legal textbook. He would point you toward the human brain specifically, its flaws. Charlie realized early on that, while we like to think of ourselves as rational actors, we are actually social primates running on ancient software that is riddled with bugs. He spent decades collecting these bugs into a framework he called the Psychology of Human Misjudgment. This is the Mungerism that has influenced more people than his investment picks. He understood that if you can identify the 25 standard causes of human misjudgment, you can build a radar system to avoid the cognitive shipwrecks that claim everyone else. 1. The incentive-caused bias, the superpower of nature. Charlie's first and most important rule was, never, ever, think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. He believed that incentives are so powerful that they can make even the most honest person subconsciously rationalize terrible behavior. He often used the example of a salesman. You ask a Xerox salesman if you need a new copier, he will almost always say yes. He isn't necessarily lying to you. His brain has simply filtered reality so that he genuinely believes you need a new copier, because his commission depends on it. In real life, we see this everywhere. Doctors who recommend unnecessary surgeries, lawyers who prolong cases, and CEOs who cook the books for bonuses. Charlie's lesson is simple. If you want to understand why a person is behaving in a certain way, look at how they are being paid. Don't appeal to their better nature when you could be appealing to their self-interest. 2. The Lollapalooza effect, the psychological chain reaction. This is Charlie's own term for what happens when multiple psychological biases act together in the same direction. He argued that most massive successes and massive disasters are not caused by one thing, but by a Lollapalooza of forces. Think about a cult. You have social proof, everyone else is doing it. Authority bias, the leader says so. Commitment and consistency, you've already given them your money. And Deprevol's superreaction, the fear of being kicked out of the group. When these 4 or 5 biases hit a person at the same time, their rational brain shuts down completely. Charlie used this to explain why Tupperware parties worked so well, or why open outcry auctions result in people paying way too much for a company. Looked for these Lollapaloozas to avoid them in his own life and to profit from them when the market was acting like a crazed cult. 3. Social proof and the lemming problem. We are biological imitators. In the wild, if you see the rest of your tribe running in one direction, you don't stop to ask why. You run, or you get eaten. In the modern world, this manifests as the herd mentality. Charlie noticed that in business, people feel safer being wrong with the crowd than being right alone. If every other company is buying a certain type of software or entering a certain market, a CEO will feel pressured to do the same, even if it makes no sense. Munger's antidote was to be inner scorecard driven. He didn't care if everyone thought he was crazy for sitting on a pile of cash for 10 years. He only cared about what the facts said. For the man with a hammer and professional narrowness, as we've discussed before, Charlie hated specialization without context. Psychologically, this is called incentive-caused bias mixed with availability. Heuristic, a surgeon wants to cut. An architect wants to build. Consultant wants to re-strategize. Charlie's solution was to force himself to use his latticework. He believed that if you don't have the big ideas from the other disciplines, you are essentially a one-legged man in an eskicking contest. You will misjudge the situation because your mental tool set is too small to handle the complexity of reality. 5. Deprevol's superreaction, the fear of losing. Humans are wired to feel the pain of a loss much more intensely than the joy of an equal gain. This is loss aversion. Charlie saw this as a major cause of ruin. People will double down on a losing bet because they can't stand to realize the loss. He saw this in bridge players and in corporate executives. They would throw good money after bad just to avoid the psychological sting of being wrong. Charlie's rule was, face the facts, especially when they are unpleasant. He trained himself to love it when he was proven wrong, because it meant he was now less stupid than he was 5 minutes ago. 6. the consistency trap. Once we take a public stand or make a choice, we feel an overwhelming pressure to be consistent with that choice, even if new data proves we were wrong. This is why it's so hard to change someone's mind about politics or religion, and why it's so hard for an investor to sell a stock they once praised in an interview. Charlie avoided this by avoiding public pronouncements. He kept his ideas fluid. He often quoted Charles Darwin, who made a habit of immediately writing down any data that contradicted his theories. Darwin knew that the human brain would naturally forget the contradictory evidence to stay consistent. Charlie did the same. He was constantly trying to murder his own darlings. Reflection, the crap detector in your pocket. As we look at the psychology of human misjudgment, we have to ask how many of these bugs are currently running in our own minds. Are you staying in a bad job because of commitment and consistency? Are you buying things you don't need because of social proof? Charlie's psychology wasn't meant to be an academic exercise. It was a practical operating system. He used it to X-ray every situation. When someone brought him a deal, he didn't just look at the numbers. He looked at the people and asked, what biases are at play here? Is the CEO being blinded by authority bias? Is the board suffering from social proof? By understanding the machinery of the mind, Charlie became a ghost in the machine. He could see the traps before they snapped shut. This is the ultimate worldly wisdom, knowing that the most dangerous person you will ever meet is your own unexamined self. Key takeaway: human beings are biologically prone to systematic errors in judgment. By learning the 25 standard psychological biases and how they combine into Lollapaloozas, you can develop a crap detector that protects you from your own biology and the delusions of the crowd. Now that we've explored the internal map of Munger's mind, it's time to see how he applied these psychological insights to the greatest giant of them all. In the next chapter, we'll look at the culture and structure of Berkshire Hathaway, the decentralized fortress that proved Munger's theories could work on a massive global scale. Chapter 12. Berkshire Hathaway, the Great Experiment. If Charlie Munger was the architect and Warren Buffett was the builder, then Berkshire Hathaway was their cathedral of vast, unconventional structure that defied every best practice taught in business schools. By the late 1970s and early 80s, Berkshire had transitioned from a dying textile mill into a diversified holding company. But it wasn't just its profits that were unusual. It was its culture. In a world where corporations were becoming increasingly bureaucratic, centralized, and obsessed with short-term earnings guidance, Munger and Buffett were running a great experiment. They wanted to see if they could build a multi-billion-dollar empire based on a handful of Omaha principles: extreme decentralization, a seamless web of deserved trust, and a total refusal to play the Wall Street game. The anti-headquarters philosophy. Most companies the size of Berkshire have thousands of employees at their corporate headquarters, armies of HR managers, legal departments, and middle managers. Charlie found this repulsive. He viewed bureaucracy as a cancer that slowed down decision-making and incentivized people to create busy work to justify their salaries. Berkshire's headquarters in Omaha famously consisted of about 20 people. There was no legal department. There was no strategic planning division. Charlie's logic was rooted in trust and autonomy. He believed that if you hire the right people, fanatics who love their businesses, and you give them total control, you don't need to monitor them. You just need to check the results once a year. This is a profound lesson in scalability. Most leaders think that to grow, you must add more control. Charlie argued that to grow truly large, you must relinquish control. By delegating almost everything except the allocation of capital, he and Warren stayed free to do what they did best: think. The seamless web of deserved trust. Charlie often spoke about the seamless web of deserved trust as the highest form of human organization. He noted that in a specialized society, we spend massive amounts of transaction costs on monitoring each other, if contracts, audits, and lawsuits, because we don't trust each other. At Berkshire, Charlie and Warren operated on a handshake culture. They bought multi-million-dollar companies without a single due diligence meeting if they trusted the owner. They realized that trust is the ultimate economic lubricant. If you can trust the person on the other side of the deal, everything moves faster and costs less. However, notice the word deserved. This wasn't blind faith. Charlie used his psychology of human misjudgment to vet people. He looked for a track record of integrity and long-term greed. Once someone proved they deserved trust, Charlie gave it to them in unlimited quantities. The no guidance policy. Wall Street is built on earnings guidance. Companies tell analysts they will earn $1.02 per share. And if they earn $1.01, the stock crashes. This leads to earnings management, a polite term for manipulating numbers to satisfy the market. Charlie viewed this as a moral and intellectual failure. At Berkshire, they never gave guidance. They didn't care about the next quarter. They cared about the next quarter century. By refusing to play the short-term game, they attracted a specific kind of shareholder, the long-term partner. This created a lollapalooza of stability, because their shareholders didn't panic. Munger and Buffett didn't have to worry about the stock price, because they didn't worry about the stock price. They could make the right long-term decisions, which eventually made the stock price go up anyway. It was a self-reinforcing loop of rationality. The acquisition of quality people. When Berkshire bought a company, they usually kept the existing management in place. Charlie realized that the most valuable asset in a business isn't the machines. It's the industrial spirit of the person running it. He looked for owners who didn't want to retire. He famously said he wanted to buy businesses from people who love the business more than the money. This is because a person who loves the money will cut corners to get more of it, but a person who loves the business will protect its moat at all costs. The inversion of corporate governance. While most boards of directors are filled with trophy names who collect fees for nodding their heads, Berkshire's board was filled with people who had a massive portion of their own net worth in the company. Charlie hated the agency problem of modern boards. He believed that if you aren't skin in the game, you have no right to steer the ship. He also used the board meetings as a platform for public education. He and Warren turned the Berkshire Annual Report into a textbook on business and life. They were essentially inverting the role of the CEO. Instead of trying to spin the news, they used their failures as teaching moments. They were radically transparent because they knew that transparency builds the very trust that makes the seamless web possible. Reflection. Are you building a fortress of trust? As we look at the Berkshire experiment, we have to ask, in our own lives and businesses, are we adding bureaucracy or trust? Most of us, when we feel out of control, try to add more rules to our lives, more apps, more schedules, more monitoring. Charlie's life suggests that the better path is to simplify and select. If you choose the right habits, the right partners, and the right goals, you don't need 1,000 rules, just need a few big ideas and the discipline to stick to them. Berkshire Hathaway was the proof that worldly wisdom wasn't just a theory. It was a way to build the most successful financial engine in history. But Charlie wasn't just a vice chairman. He had his own laboratory, a place where his no was the law of the land. In the next chapter, we'll look at Wesco Financial Charlie's personal sovereign state of rationality. Key takeaway? Success at scale requires radical decentralization and a culture of deserved trust. By eliminating bureaucracy and focusing on long-term value over short-term guidance, you create a system that is both more efficient and more resilient than the competition. Chapter 13. Wesco Financial. If Berkshire Hathaway was the great cathedral of the Buffett-Munger partnership, Wesco Financial was Charlie's private chapel. Located in Pasadena, California, Wesco was a subsidiary of Berkshire, but it functioned as Charlie's personal laboratory. It was here that the world got to see Munger unplugged. At Berkshire meetings, Charlie was famously the man who said, "I have nothing to add," but at the Wesco annual meetings, he would sit for hours, holding court, dissecting the follies of modern life with the precision of a surgeon and the grumpiness of a man who had seen too many people make the same stupid mistakes for 80 years. Wesco is a study in the power of the niche. It proved that you don't need a massive army to win a war, just need a few big ideas and the courage to ignore the noise. The sovereign state of simplicity. Wesco started as a savings and loan association. When Berkshire took control, Charlie stripped it down to its bare essentials. While other financial institutions were hiring hundreds of analysts and risk managers to navigate the complexities of the market, Charlie ran Wesco with a skeleton crew. He believed that most complexity in finance is just a way for people to hide their lack of understanding. He practiced low-friction management. At Wesco, there were no committees, there were no brainstorming sessions. There was just Charlie, a desk, and a stack of reports. Realized that a single, clear-thinking mind is often more effective than a room full of people trying to reach a consensus. Consensus, in Charlie's view, usually leads to the lowest common denominator, a safe, mediocre decision that avoids risk, but also avoids greatness. The art of the no. At Wesco, Charlie's primary job was to say no. He turned down thousands of deals. This is a difficult psychological feat. Humans have an innate action bias, the feeling that we must be doing something to be productive. If a fund manager isn't trading, they feel like they aren't earning their keep. Charlie inverted this. He felt that every time he said no to a mediocre deal, he was protecting his yes for the one great deal that would eventually come along. He called this the art of not being stupid. Most people are trying to be brilliant, which is hard. Charlie was just trying to avoid being idiotic, which is much easier and, over time, more profitable. He waited for years to deploy Wesco's capital. When the market was euphoric and everyone was making easy money, Charlie sat still. He was criticized for being out of touch or too conservative. He didn't care. He knew that the market eventually reverts to the mean, and when the crash came, Wesco would be the only one with a full canteen in the middle of a desert. The precision of wait-and-see. Wesco's portfolio was a masterpiece of selective concentration. It held large positions in companies like Freddie Mac before it became problematic in Coca-Cola. But Charlie's approach to these holdings was lethargy, bordering on sloth. He understood the math of compounding. If you find a great business and you sell it because the stock went up 20%, you have to pay taxes on that gain and then find another great business to put the money into. Oh, this is friction. But if you hold that great business for 30 years, you never pay the tax man, and the compounding works on the government's money. This is a lesson in long-term thinking. In our modern app-driven economy, we are encouraged to check our portfolios every 10 minutes. Charlie's Wesco years teach us that the most valuable thing you can do for your wealth is to turn off your computer and go for a walk. The work of investing is the waiting, not the doing. The gerrymander of ethics. One of the most profound things about the Wesco meetings was Charlie's focus on ethical integrity. He often spoke about the legal but sleazy traps of the financial world. He believed that if you operate close to the line of the law, you will eventually cross it. He wanted a wide margin of safety, not just in his finances, but in his morals. He believed that good ethics is good business. If people know you are honest, they will bring you the best deals first. If people know you are a cutter of corners, you will only get the leftover deals from other corner cutters. At Wesco, Charlie built a brand of such extreme integrity that his yes was as good as a 100-page contract. The Sage of Pasadena and the Public Witness. The Wesco annual meetings became a pilgrimage for Mongerites. People would fly from all over the world to hear Charlie speak. He didn't talk about quarterly earnings. He talked about the decline of civilization, folly of the architecture at UCSB, and the importance of Stoicism. He was using Wesco as a platform for mental hygiene. He believed that the world is constantly trying to make you stupid. Advertising tries to make you impulsive. Politics tries to make you tribal. Social media tries to make you distracted. Charlie used his meetings to scrub the brains of his followers. He reminded them that the only thing that matters is the truth, regardless of how unpopular or grumpy it makes you sound. Reflection: is your life decentralized or cluttered? As we look at the Wesco laboratory, we have to ask, do we have a private chapel of rationality in our own lives? Most of us are overmanaged. We have too many apps, too many meetings, and too many people in our ear. Charlie's Wesco years suggest that we should strip away the non-essential. We should find our niche, the place where we have a competitive advantage, and we should defend it with a seamless web of trust. We should learn to love the word no. Wesco was eventually fully folded back into Berkshire in 2011. But the Wesco spirit remains. It is the spirit of the independent thinker, the man who doesn't need a crowd to know he's right. Key takeaway: extraordinary success often comes from doing less, but doing it with more conviction and higher ethics. By simplifying your environment and mastering the art of the no, you protect your capacity for the few big wins that truly matter. Charlie was now in his 80s, but his mind was as sharp as the day he met Warren. He had built the conglomerate, he had refined the psychology, and he had proven the niche model at Wesco. But he wasn't done. He was becoming something even larger, a public philosopher. In the next chapter, we'll look at his role at the Daily Journal and how he spent his final years focusing on the bigger picture of human knowledge. Chapter 14: The Daily Journal and Public Life. As Charlie Munger entered his 80s and 90s, most men would have been content to fade into a quiet retirement of golf and grandchildren. But for Charlie, age was simply another variable to be optimized. While he remained the indispensable vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, he increasingly focused his attention on a smaller, more personal venture, the Daily Journal Corporation. If Wesco was his chapel, the Daily Journal was his megaphone. It was here, and through a series of increasingly public speeches, that Munger transitioned from being a legendary investor to becoming a global teacher of rationality. This era of his life is a study in intellectual generosity. He realized that his greatest asset wasn't his billions, but his mental operating system. He felt a moral obligation to share the grand rules of the game with anyone willing to listen, a toll bridge of information. The Daily Journal was a specialized legal publishing company based in Los Angeles. To anyone else, it looked like a dying print business in the age of the internet. To Charlie, it was a micro-monopoly. California, certain legal notices must be published in a recognized newspaper of record. By owning the dominant player in that niche, Charlie owned a toll bridge on the legal highway. He didn't care about having the biggest newspaper, cared about having the most essential one. He applied the same lethargy bordering on sloth to the Daily Journal's capital. During the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when most banks were collapsing, Charlie used the Daily Journal's cash to buy massive amounts of bank stocks, like Wells Fargo, at the literal bottom of the market. It was a classic Munger move. Use a stable, boring business to fund aggressive, high-conviction bets when everyone else is panicking. The philosopher in the public square, the Daily Journal annual meetings became even more legendary than the Wesco meetings. Because the company was smaller, the setting was more intimate. Charlie would sit at a simple table, flanked by microphones, and take questions for hours. He didn't just talk about stocks. He talked about the vices and virtues of civilization. He became a fierce critic of what he called financial engineering. He saw the rise of complex derivatives, high-frequency trading, EBITDA earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization as signs of a moral rot in capitalism. He famously called EBITDA bullish *T earnings, arguing that any manager who ignores the cost of replacing their equipment is either delusional or a liar. His public life was an exercise in radical candor. In an age of PR-polished corporate speak, Charlie was a breath of cold, Midwestern air. He didn't use euphemisms. If he thought a certain architectural design was stupid, he said so. If he thought a government policy was idiotic, he explained why using first principles. He wasn't trying to be edgy. He was trying to be accurate. He believed that the first step to solving a problem is calling it by its true name. Architecture and philanthropy, the Munger Hall controversies. One of the most fascinating aspects of Charlie's later years was his foray into architecture. He donated hundreds of millions of dollars to universities like Michigan and UCSB. On one condition, he got to design the buildings. This led to significant controversy. His designs, massive, windowless dormitories, designed for maximum density and interaction, were criticized by professional architects as inhumane. But Charlie's logic was rooted in systems thinking. He wasn't trying to make a pretty building. He was trying to solve a specific problem: how to foster the greatest amount of cross-disciplinary collaboration among students. He looked at the psychology of the space. He believed that if you forced people into common areas, they would talk more, and if they talked more, they would share mental models more. Whether he was right or wrong is still debated. But the story reveals the core of his character. He was a total nonconformist. Even in his 90s, he didn't care about the consensus of the experts. He trusted his own lattice work more than the entire architectural establishment. The great teacher and the power of the talk. During this period, Charlie gave a series of speeches that have since become the New Testament of value investing. His most famous, The Psychology of Human Misjudgment, which we covered in Chapter 11 and a lesson on elementary. Worldly wisdom were not just about money. They were about how to live a life that works. He preached the gospel of self-reliance. He argued that the most important thing a person can do is destroy at least one of their best loved. ideas every year. He saw intellectual rigidity as a form of premature death. By speaking publicly, he was trying to create a culture of rationality that could withstand the madness of crowds. The skin in the game, philanthropy. Unlike many billionaires who set up massive foundations with armies of staff, the very bureaucracy Charlie hated. Munger's philanthropy was direct and personal. He didn't want a legacy managed by committees. He wanted to solve specific, tangible problems. He gave to hospitals, schools, and libraries places that acted as engines of rationality. He believed that the best form of philanthropy wasn't just giving money away, but setting an example. He wanted people to see that you could be a winner in the most competitive game on earth, global finance, without losing your soul, your sense of humor, or your commitment to the truth. Reflection. What is your public witness? As we look at Charlie's later years, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing with the wisdom we've accumulated? Most people hoard their knowledge or use it only for their own gain. Charlie's life suggests that true success is generative. It's about building a latticework not just for yourself, but for the people who come after you. Are you willing to be the unpopular voice if it means speaking the truth? Are you building toll bridges of value, or are you just rent-seeking? The Daily Journal years showed us a man who had transcended the need for more money and was now focused on the conservation of rationality. He was the grandfather of the global village, warning us about the Lollapalooza effects that could destroy our society if we aren't careful. Key takeaway. The ultimate use of wealth and influence is the promotion of objective truth and the education of others. By maintaining intellectual independence and focusing on essential niches, you can have an impact that lasts long after your active career is over. Charlie Munger was now a legend. But his philosophy wasn't just a collection of greatest hits. It was a unified field theory of the world. In the next chapter, we'll dive into the heart of that theory, the latticework of mental models, and learn how to build our own. Chapter 15. The Latticework of Mental Models. If you were to peek inside Charlie Munger's mind, you wouldn't find a cluttered desk of random facts. Instead, you would see a perfectly constructed steel grid latticework of mental models. This is the core of Mungerism. It is his most profound contribution to the art of living and the science of decision-making. Charlie believed that the big ideas of the world are the only things that truly matter. If you don't have them organized in your head, you are essentially a one-legged man in an ice-kicking contest. Most people are specialists. They know everything about a tiny sliver of the world, be it marketing, UNG, or litigation, but they are blind to everything else. Charlie argued that this is a dangerous way to live. Because the world is a complex, interconnected system, a problem in business often has a biological solution or a psychological cause. To navigate it, you need a multidisciplinary toolkit. The big ideas from the big disciplines. Charlie didn't think you needed to know everything about every subject. He believed you only needed to know the 20% of ideas that do 80% of the work in each major field. He called these the grand scale models. For mathematics, you need permutations and combinations.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't understand the math of combinations, you can't understand the odds of a bet. You also need compound interest, which Charlie called the eighth wonder of the world. From biology, you need evolution and natural selection. Business is an ecosystem. Companies that don't adapt their environment, the market go extinct. You also need to understand social insects, bees, and ants to understand how cooperation can lead to massive emergent results. From physics, you need equilibrium and critical mass. In business, as in physics, there is a point where a small additional amount of energy or capital causes a massive self-sustaining reaction. From engineering, you need backup systems and redundancy. Charlie applied this to his life by always having margin of safety in his bank account and his plans. If one thing fails, the whole bridge shouldn't collapse. The psychology of the hook. A latticework is only useful if the models are interconnected, Charlie famously said. You've got to hang experience on a latticework of models in your head. Think of a fact as a loose coat. If you just throw it in a closet, it falls to the floor and you can't find it when you need it. But if you have a lattice of hangers, you can hang the fact, the coat, on the correct hanger, the model. When you see a new business, you don't just see a company. You see a biological system competing for resources, a psychological machine creating habits, and a mathematical engine compounding capital. Because you have the hangers ready, the new information clicks into place. This is why Charlie could read a report on a company he'd never heard of, and within 10 minutes, understand it better than the CEO. He wasn't smarter, just had a better filing system. The Lollapalooza of combined models. The real magic happens when multiple models interact. We've discussed the Lollapalooza effect in psychology, but it applies to everything. Take the success of a shopping mall. It's not just real estate. It's a combination of geography, location, social proof people go where other people are. Pavlovian association, the smell of the food court makes you hungry. Incentives, the anchor stores get cheap rent to bring in the crowds. When all these big ideas move in the same direction, you get a Lollapalooza of profit. If you only look at them all through the lens of an accountant, you miss the psychological and biological forces that actually make it work. The antidote to man with a hammer syndrome. We return to Charlie's favorite warning, to a man with only a hammer. Every problem looks like a nail. If you are a chiropractor, you think every ailment is in the spine. If you are a computer scientist, you think every problem can be solved with an algorithm. Charlie's Latticework forces you to put down the hammer. Before you make a decision, you must walk through your mental checklist of the other disciplines. Is this a physics problem? Is it a psychology problem? Is it a math problem? This creates a synthesized perspective. It makes you harder to fool because you aren't just looking at the official version of reality. You are looking at the underlying version. You become a detective of the truth, the difficulty of maintenance. He also emphasized the need to destroy your own ideas. As the world changes, some models become less useful, and new ones emerge. A latticework is a living thing. You have to weed it. Charlie was famous for changing his mind when the facts changed. He didn't care about looking consistent. He cared about being right. Reflection. What is your mental grid made of? As we look at the latticework of mental models, we have to audit our own education. Most of us stopped learning the big ideas of other fields the day we graduated. We became specialists. Do you know the big ideas of biology? You understand the incentive structures of your own company? You have a math filter to see if a deal is actually a scam? Charlie's life teaches us that the most valuable software you will ever install is a diverse set of mental models. It is the only way to achieve worldly wisdom. Without it, you are just guessing. With it, you are calculating. Key takeaway. True wisdom comes from a multidisciplinary latticework of the world's big ideas. By organizing your experience through the lenses of physics, biology, psychology, and math, you can see patterns that specialists miss and avoid the man with a hammer trap. Charlie's latticework was complete. It used it to build a fortune, a family, and a philosophy. But even the strongest lattice eventually meets the end of the road. In our final chapter, we'll look at Charlie's last act, his legacy, his final reflections, and what it truly means to have lived a successful life. Chapter 16. Later Years and Legacy. As Charlie Munger moved into his late 90s, he became a living monument to the power of a well-ordered mind. While most people at that age are retreating into the fog of memory, Charlie remained a book with legs until the very end. He didn't just age, he perfected. His later years were not a period of decline, but a final, elegant demonstration of his core thesis, that a life built on rationality, integrity, and continuous learning produces a compounding effect that extends far beyond your bank account. The sage of the century. In his final decade, Charlie's role at Berkshire Hathaway shifted from active architect to cultural anchor. He and Warren Buffett had become the grandfathers of global capitalism. At the annual meetings, the Woodstock for capitalists, the crowds grew to over 40,000 people. They didn't come just to hear about insurance float. They came to see two men who had managed to stay clean in a dirty game for over half a century. Janet Lowe captures a man who was acutely aware of his own mortality, but entirely unsentimental about it. He viewed his impending death as a biological necessity, the ultimate inversion. If you want to have a vibrant, evolving civilization, the old must make way for the new. He didn't fear the end because he had pre-mortemed it decades ago. He had built a system both in his family and in his business that didn't depend on his physical presence. The legacy of deserved trust. If you asked Charlie what his greatest achievement was, he wouldn't point to the stock price of Berkshire. He would point to the seamless web of deserved trust he had helped build. He proved that you could build a $700 billion conglomerate based on a handshake. This is his most radical legacy. In a world that is increasingly cynical, where we assume everyone is out for themselves, and every contract needs 100 lawyers, Munger's life is a standing contradiction. He showed that being straight is a competitive advantage. Because people knew Charlie would never cheat them, the best businesses and the best people gravitated toward him. He didn't have to hunt for deals. The deals hunted for him. The Munger way of philanthropy. As we discussed, Charlie's final years were marked by massive, direct giving. But even in his generosity, he was Munger-esque. He didn't want to help everyone a little bit. He wanted to change a few things a lot. He focused on the foundations of reason, by funding libraries and university housing. He was trying to build physical latticeworks where young minds could interact. He often spoke about the responsibility of the successful. He believed that if you have been lucky enough to have a high IQ and a stable environment, you owe the world a rationality dividend. You have a duty to be a transmitter of the big ideas. He saw himself as a link in a chain of wisdom that stretched back to Benjamin Franklin and Marcus Aurelius. The final no? Even in his 90s, Charlie hadn't lost his crap detector. He remained one of the few voices in the financial world willing to call out the excesses of Silicon Valley and the insanity of certain political movements. He was a truth-teller at a time when truth was becoming a commodity. He famously warned about the Lollapalooza of social media, tribalism, and easy credit. He saw these as negative compounding forces that could tear the social fabric. His legacy is one of caution. He taught us that it is much easier to break a civilization than it is to build one, and that the only defense is a citizenry of independent, rational thinkers. The tribe is complete. At the end, Charlie was surrounded by his large, extended family. His second marriage to Nancy had lasted 54 years until her passing in 2010. He had seen his children and grandchildren grow into people of substance. This was the ultimate compounding. He had started as a divorced, grieving, broke lawyer in the 1950s and ended as the patriarch of a massive, thriving intellectual dynasty. He proved that the long game works. If you make the right choices in your 20s, they pay off in your 90s. If you treat people well today, you are surrounded by love tomorrow. It sounds like a Hallmark card, but in Munger's hands, it was a mathematical certainty. Reflection. What is your 100-year plan? As we close the book on Charlie's life, we have to look at our own trajectory. Most of us are living week to week, or at best year to year. We are day traders of our own lives. Charlie Munger's life asks us, what are you building that will be more valuable in 50 years than it is today? Asterisk. Are you building a latticework of knowledge? Are you building a web of trust? Are you inverting your problems to avoid the big mistakes? When Charlie passed away in late 2023, just shy of his 100th birthday, the world didn't just lose a billionaire, it lost a compass. But because he was so generous with his worldly wisdom, the map remains. Key takeaway. A successful life is the result of rationality compounded over decades. By focusing on integrity, autonomy, and the big ideas, you create a legacy that is not just about wealth, but about the elevation of the human mind. As we close the cover on the life of Charlie Munger, we realize that we haven't just been reading a biography of a billionaire. We have been studying a manual for mental liberation. The deeper message of damn right is that the greatest asset any of us possesses is not our capital, but our objectivity. In a world that is increasingly loud, impulsive, and tribal, Charlie Munger was a man who chose to be quiet, patient, and independent. He proved that you don't need to be a genius to achieve extraordinary results. You just need to be slightly less idiotic than the average person, and you need to be that way for a very long time. His life was a 99-year experiment in the power of rationality compounded. He showed us that if you treat your mind like a garden weeding out biases, planting big ideas from every discipline, and protecting your integrity like it's your only source of water, you will eventually grow a fortress that no market crash or personal tragedy can topple. As you walk away from this intellectual journey, here are 4 practical Munger principles to carry into your own life. The inversion filter, whenever you are stuck. Stop asking, how do I succeed? And start asking, what would definitely make me fail? Then, spend your energy avoiding those things. The circle of competence. Be brutally honest about what you don't know. It is much safer to be a know-nothing than a know-it-all who is wrong. The latticework habit. Never let a fact stand alone. Every time you learn something new, ask, how does this relate to biology? How does it relate to psychology? How does it relate to math? The seamless web of trust. Live your life in a way that you deserve the trust of others. In the long run, being straight is the most profitable strategy there is. Charlie Munger was the man who had the courage to say no to the world so that he could say yes to the truth. He didn't just accumulate money, he accumulated autonomy. Ended his life exactly as he started it, as an Omahan with a book in his hand, looking at the world with a sharp, curious, and slightly grumpy eye, and finding it infinitely fascinating. The question he leaves for us is simple, but haunting. Are you building a latticework that can support the weight of a long life, or are you just swinging at every pitch? The game of life is a long one. If you want to win, you have to stay at the crease. You have to wait for the fat pitch, and when it comes, you have to be ready to swing with everything you've got. As Charlie would say, I have nothing further to add.